Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from New York Community Bank, AmTrust Title Insurance Company, Perfect Building Maintenance, M&T Bank, Customers Bank, Marks Paneth LLP, Capital One Bank, Collins Building Services, Meridian Capital Group. Additional support has been provided by grants from AKA Hotel Residences Corman Communities, Ariel Property Advisors, Amerant Bank, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Briarwood Organization, Chase Commercial Mortgage Lending, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Citizens Bank, Dime Community Bank, Douglaston Development Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handro Properties LLC, Handler Real Estate Organization, Hodges Ward Elliott INC, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, John Casamatides Red Apple Group, Keysight Capital Partners, Matone Group, New Banks, Newmark Knight Frank, Ocean First Bank, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Rockefeller Group, Rosewood Realty Services, Stonehenge NYC, SVN CPEX Real Estate Services, Tierra CRG, the Meringer Family Foundation, and these friends. Hello, my name is Michael Stoller, host of the Stoller Report and the moderator for the AmTrust Title webinar series, Stephen DiPolitano, Senior Executive Vice President. Today's topic is what's really happening in the industrial market. My guests, they include Frank Zuckerbrot, who's the president of Shalom and Zuckerbrot Realty, LLC, Andrea Himmel, who is Director of Strategic Investments at Himmel and Meringorf Properties, Brad Blumenfeld, who is the Vice President at Blumenfeld Development, and last but not least, Lester Petracca, who is the President and CEO of Triangle Equities. So, Frank, going back years when your father went into the business and when you started with the business, industrial was an asset that nobody really liked. Where do we see industrial today in light of COVID, in light of e-commerce, in light of everything?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, back when my dad started in the commercial business in the late 50s, New York City was this Fortune 500 capital for industry. And we had a very vibrant industrial community that covered a diverse array of businesses, a lot of production, a lot of manufacturing, in addition to traditional distribution. My dad used to always love to comment when he looked at some of these buildings that from the outside it looked ugly compared to a beautiful office building or a sparkling brand new shopping center. He would say these industrial buildings, they don't look so good, but you don't have to really put a lot of money into them for what they put out back to you. And I think more than ever today, it still continues to demonstrate that strength as an investment class. And I think that's one of the reasons, among the other tailwinds that industrial real estate's enjoying today, is that the investment generally that goes into that product class, the return on investment is less risk oriented. The investment to bring the tenants in is much lower than the investment, say, to bring an office tenant in or a retail tenant. So that, coupled with what was a normal trajectory of growth for the internet business, and now, as you say, and that's pre-COVID, now post-COVID, I like to say we're in like dog months now, dog years. In the last 2 to 3 months, we've experienced an enormous increase in the slope of adapting to the internet from the business to consumer end. And it's live, it's happening now, and the results are almost difficult to fully comprehend because it's happening so quickly.
Andrea, let's talk a little bit about the investment that you bought in the Bronx last year and the other industrial property that you have in Long Island City?
Sure. So last May, we purchased 1601 Bronxdale Avenue in Parkchester. It's a 7.5-acre site with a 300,000 square foot multi-use warehouse. We really liked it because it was fundamentally a good structure with great technical specs that warehouse tenants are really attracted to. So for example, 25-foot ceilings, 30 by 30 column spacing, 1 loading dock per 5,000 square feet or 40 loading docks, ingress, egress for 53-foot trailers. So all the things that you study that you try to optimize for, this property had, and we were able to secure it pretty, basically off market. It's near to highways, it's got great parking, and it was primarily just a pure play where we thought in-place rents were too low. We weren't underwriting, triple net $30 a foot. We were very reasonable in our assumptions, and the market has come to us. I was gonna say we have some properties in Queens that are industrial. One right off the bridge in Long Island City, on near the Queens Bridge project area, and it's multi-story kind of flex warehouse space. We put in a lot of capital to that. We bought that in 2017, and another one on Queens Boulevard by the train, and we bought that in 1986 because we are long-term owners, and we've held that property since actually I was born.
So here we look at Lester and Brad, and both of them have been in the variety of shopping centers over the years. And Brad, last year you with Goldman Sachs went into the industrial business, and Lester, you're building a brand new industrial near the airport. Brad, let's talk about your property and how Goldman Sachs got involved.
As you said, we've been heavy in industrial over the years, and our company's focused and cycled through a lot of different product types, but primarily focused on this market. So my father started in industrial, he moved over to office, and then he later moved into retail. We're doing some multifamily, some medical office, some self-storage. So we sort of saw the writing on the wall, that retail was, the pace of growth was slowing for a lot of retailers. And we, strategically made the move to go back into industrial, and, for all the reasons Frank and Andrea said. So basically there's, lower cost of capital, stickier tenants, the cost to refit or retrofit a space from tenant to tenant is fairly low because pretty much they're just using the box. And at the same time, we noticed that, it's certainly in this market, there was a lot of decreasing supply because there were a lot of gentrification in neighborhoods that had gone from, industrial to loft space that were getting converted to loft office or loft residential. The rental rates were improving and the supply demand imbalance was getting more favorable to ownership. So we were strategically seeking this out, and we, made a focus to target a bunch of industrial properties in the market. The Bronx site that we bought with Goldman Sachs was, fit all the demographics that Andrea said about her Parkchester site. Our site has great parking, great highway access, great bones, terrific column grid, a reasonable size. It's 145,000 feet. It just made sense to us, and it looks like it'll be a good investment.
Lester, Triangle has, Junction, other properties, a lot of items, and even in Staten Island today. You're at Kennedy Airport. Let's talk about your 2-story industrial property.
First of all, the project in Kennedy is 152,000 square feet of Class A warehouse logistics. I think we've got 25-foot ceiling heights. We have 50 by 50 column, one per 5,000 square feet loading dock. It's actually on the second floor. It's only the second one in the country. So the tractor trailers actually will be driving up to the second floor. It's got a truck court, and it's right at the back entrance of JFK. So it's, we think, ideally positioned. It's foundation construction, tiebacks are done. And along with that, we're putting in 120,000 square feet of self-storage.
What about this conversion today of converting the retail to a industrial. I think a good example recently came out with a transaction that Frank was talking to me about with the Saunders Equity in Old Country Road. Frank, you want to talk about that?
Sure. This has got to be in the mid-90s. We actually brought Century Department Stores back out to what was then called Spiegel Associates before the two companies divided. And we worked with them to convert a warehouse into retail. And that was a higher and better use. It was a wonderful building on an oversized plot. And fast forward now almost 30 years. And today, the owners of that property have decided that its highest and best use value is going back towards industrial. And they're actually going to take a 200,000 foot building and downsize the building to about 150,000 feet. But this building will have all the bells and whistles of what the most selective industrial users are looking for in terms of ceiling heights, column spacing, loading, truck courts, employee parking, and adjacent to a sort of last mile type location for the business to consumer, as well as also just being amenitized within a community that's got a lot of services, retail, restaurants, sort of like hits on all checklists.
So if we follow that flow, you know, there are numerous shopping centers around the country. A number of them have seen Kmart, Target, other stores leave. Why don't people convert these shopping centers, or why do they convert these shopping centers to industrial?
I'm going to add to that, Michael, that when you said Kmart, there was a Kmart that closed in Middle Village, Queens, along with some other retail space, a Raymore and Flanagan. I don't know if it was Raymore and Flanagan, but there was another use in there. It was an industrial building that was converted to retail for Kmart and now converted back to Amazon industrial.
There's no question that with the contraction of retail, and it started before COVID-19, that a lot of properly positioned retail centers very well may become warehousing. If you look at the Whitestone Expressway project of ours that has the multiplex on the second floor, that is an ideal building. It also has another 200,000 square feet of FAR. So it's a perfect building to convert. The tenants, however, for the most part, do have long-term leases. So we need to understand what they're going to do over the long term with those leases. But it would be a great conversion. There's a lot of properties out there like that.
And the great part about converting these bigger malls into warehouses is you've already got great parking ratios, a lot of land, you've got great loading dock, and often ceiling heights too.
There was a study by CBRE and Cushman and Wakefield about a year ago saying that certain of the municipalities really aren't happy with it because, you know, when it's retail, there was sales tax. When it's industrial, there's not sales tax.
I was just gonna say, I don't think that you're comparing retail to industrial taxing. You're comparing empty to industrial. So I don't think you have that luxury of choice in a lot of situations anymore.
And I think in a lot of cases, Michael, as everybody on this panel knows, a lot of the retail are in M1 zones in the city. It's as of right.
Right.
It's amazing to listen to Lester talk about his property along the Whitestone Expressway when for 20 plus years, the city of New York tried to get industrial buildings built over there and there wasn't a market for it. Everything was in New Jersey. Everything went to Long Island. And so ultimately, what Lester was doing and some others was finally embraced by the city. And yet, when we look at it, it's actually a short period of time where they're enjoying this different use other than industrial. And now it's coming back to that is arguably one of the best industrial locations in the city of New York.
You know, when you talk industrial, people fail to remember there's also manufacturing. So, you know, certain places like Industry City, which continues to have manufacturing, there's also food services. Frank, with your portfolio of industrial, how many tenants came to you for deferrals of rent, and how many are complaining that they must do this or they're going to go out of business?
Fortunately, Michael, to date, we have close to 200 tenants in the portfolio. And I think 6 tenants approached us about deferrals, and that all started in April. Mostly, we have some larger boxes, larger chains, and a lot of essential businesses. So we got a little bit lucky right now. We have a lot of medical. But I would say on the whole, from what I'm hearing on the industrial side, probably somewhere between 10 and 20% of the industrial tenants are looking for help. And as one would expect, it's the smaller businesses more than the larger businesses. So many of them are not facing the same level of challenges. But if they're a manufacturer or a maker or in the food business, that's a different story. They're having problems.
You know, a number of years ago, it was in vogue to convert industrial properties to office space. Today, with the fact that people are saying that they can work at home, this pre-industrial space to office may have difficulties. Do you think these properties will be converted back, like the Fauci building and a number of these other properties?
I can speak to that because I have an anecdote. In 2017, we purchased 2107 41st Avenue. It's in Long Island City. It's a multi-story warehouse flex space, and we thought we would we invested a lot of capital in it, improved it, and then thought to reposition it as like a TAMI building in Long Island City, and really played into or bought into the flex office theme. We also have storage and warehousing tenants in the building too, and it's got great loading. This property has done well on the leasing front, but not leasing to the tenants that we originally thought. So there is no TAMI market in Long Island City, as Frank can testify to, and it's less of an office market. It's more your traditional warehouse storage kind of tenants that you're going to see doing the leasing. And increasingly, as we see COVID have an impact on inventory concerns, there is increased demand from even government to store supplies in the local area. And this property, for example, would be a great candidate given that it has some availability coming up.
And Mike, you have to remember that the history of many of these buildings that you're alluding to were garment industry buildings where you had a lot of sewing and knitting and operations that would jam a lot of people in, and was less concerned about bringing in 53-foot trucks and was less concerned about distribution. So they really were maker buildings. And then we had a number of large department stores that were in Manhattan that wanted to jam everything into one plot. They didn't mind having that vertical product. Those upper floors on those buildings went through a very difficult period from the 80s into the 90s until they were properly converted, some of them, not all of them. And so to go back to trying to reuse them for industrial is a little bit more of a challenge. Now, look, Amazon took an office building in Manhattan, 7 West 34th Street.
Right, I was going to bring it out. The old Auerbach's, it was a retail store.
This is how we think a lot.
Back to retail, and then it was converted to office. Now it's converted to an industrial warehouse.
But you have a density factor at 34th Street and 5th Avenue that you don't have in these parts of Long Island City yet. So, you know, this future was looking very bright with continued migration of Midtown South tenants. Some people were trying to call this Midtown East, Southeast, they were saying. And there was some traction taking place. I think that will decelerate. But the good news is there might be something else on the horizon coming into Long Island City. And that's going to be in the life sciences and biotech space. So that might start to absorb some of this product, and those owners might pivot in that direction.
I would say that the industrial users that are going on upper floors are going to be more akin to the product type that Lester's building, where there's multi-levels of loading, you know, on each different floor. So, you know, it's more room for product and merchandise to go through a system, and then they could all the goods are close to population densities. But, you know, it's going to be hard to reposition for the uses that Frank was talking about.
You know, we were talking yesterday with regard to Amazon being a very large user of e-commerce, including in Staten Island, but Jet.com, which is owned by Walmart, didn't do well. Frank, why don't you bring up the fact about that Home Depot building?
Sure. Well, first off, Jet.com is just a comedy of errors because they came into New York City with a direct-to-consumer supermarket model in the Bronx and on Long Island, and they shut it just pre-COVID. They missed the party, which is really a shame. We're seeing now more companies wanting to put their toe in on the direct-to-customer model. Recently on Long Island, a developer built on speculation a 200,000 square foot building in Hicksville. So we'll call that sort of a central Nassau County location. And Home Depot net leased the entire building to have that distribution center with direct to consumer. And they paid a very good number for it. So someone took the risk of putting together a building that has, again, what it says, all the bells and whistles, right ceiling heights, right column spans, loading, truck courts, parking, high efficiency sprinkler system, all the things that would demand the highest rents. And to Brad's point, right now, we're sitting on the sidelines watching 4 or 5 projects going on that are going to try to achieve what seems to be a very high rent, but actually in the rearview mirror might not be a high rent. And I think that the marketplace has enough of these projects right now so that we can just see what the absorption will be like and what the execution will look like.
I think the challenge with some of these is just the cost, right? So the higher you go, the more expensive it gets. And maybe construction costs come down now post-COVID. But from what I understand from conversations with some of the developers of these projects, the costs are becoming prohibitively expensive.
Since all of you have been out over the last year or 6 months doing some financing, I know Lester had CIT finance the new property for you at Kennedy Airport. How is the lending community looking at the logistics and the industrial market today?
I can speak to that. We had, and I think you know some of the banks, a tremendous amount of interest in funding our project. By the way, our project is spec, so we don't have user in hand at this point. We're talking to a lot of people, but nonetheless, there were 2 banks that kind of almost fought over doing the financing, and it's only the second one in the country, that, as far as I know. But they love it, and I think they love it because even prior to COVID, the increase in e-commerce, for every $1 billion of sales you do, you need 1.5 million square feet of warehouse. And there is a tremendous, I believe, pent-up demand for this product. I don't think it's going to be a problem. If it has the right bays, the right loading, not every building is going to work for e-commerce, but I do think there's going to be a very strong demand for it.
Brad,
Yeah.
I know that you're trying to get some rezoning in Roslyn to go to a self-storage business. Let's talk about the self-storage business out in Long Island and the self-storage business in New York City.
In general, the New York metro area is well understored. They look at it on a per square foot per capita in a 3-mile radius is pretty much the go-to metric. And for the most part, all of New York metro is way underserved compared to national averages. So the demographics are terrific. The struggle is getting sites entitled. New York City has really made it difficult. It's basically in the M zones and C8 zone it's allowed, but they've created a bunch of overlay districts where it's not allowed within those zones. And now New York City just passed the rule that takes away any ICAP benefits for self-storage. It's not really a favorite of government because it's not a job creator. So any existing sites in New York City, I think, will be that much more insulated from any new competition, and therefore, just in a great position. Yeah, Long Island has been, it's difficult to get anything zoned on Long Island. So when you do finally get something zoned, it tends to turn into like a great investment. The struggle is up front. So, again, most of them are hard to get entitled, and therefore there's not a lot of competition. If you can endure the pain, it's worth the game.
Michael, we put in 120,000 in the logistics center in Kennedy of self-storage. We got in before the removal of the ICAP. And I think as things are absorbed, I think you'll see pressure for them to loosen that up. Because as Brad said, we're under stored, and there's going to be pressure to make a change at some point. I don't know how far down in the future, but it's only logical that they have to come to some terms to provide storage for people.
I believe Andrea and Frank brought up the fact of the life sciences, especially with Roosevelt, Cornell Tech taking place and all over the other situations. An area that's growing, which could use industrial space, is the studio business, which is expanding by leaps and bounds, both in Long Island City, Newark, Yonkers, and so on. Anybody want to discuss that?
I'll just touch upon it. I mean, we did talk about the fact that Robert De Niro and Wildflower announced that they acquired a portion of the Steinway piano manufacturing facility to open up a studio. We have Kaufman Astoria Studios now completing a second phase of expansion. So that's Astoria in Long Island City. We have Broadway Stages that recently expanded out to Middle Village. Looking at my notes, we have Lionsgate in Yonkers taking 100,000 feet, which is a major brand. Netflix in Bushwick. Cinemagic now taking a 60,000 foot building in Long Island City for an expansion. So the depth of this growth is unbelievable. And that's another tailwind for industrial real estate because the support services for each of these facilities is enormous. And those facilities are going to be in industrial buildings.
We're talking about properties in the Bronx, Queens, sometimes in Brooklyn, nothing about Staten Island. Even though Amazon took a property in Staten Island, why not Staten Island?
Staten Island's a unique market. It is the most suburban, obviously, of all the boroughs. It has the highest median income other than Manhattan because their numbers blow away, all the boroughs. You have 470,000 people, so you have a limited market. You've got 2 bridges to go over and a ferry, and the ferry's free, Michael. But I don't see much inventory getting on a ferry and going into Manhattan. So it's just not positioned well. It'll take care of itself, but after that, and you have Jersey across the Gotham Bridge where they have a tremendous amount of warehousing and a toll. So it's just not well positioned for industrial. Well positioned for residential. As soon as we get our tower built, we'll be very happy.
And I'd like to thank Frank Zuckerbrot, Andrew Himmel, Brad Blumenfeld, Lester Petracca. I'm Michael Stoller, the Stoller Report, AmTrust Title Webinars, Stephen Napolitano, and see you next week on Senior Housing.